Good afternoon, Year 6. It's great to have you online for your next science lesson about light. So, to get us started, I'd like you to think about this question. What have we learnt up to now about light? So there's two sentence starters to help you. Up to now, I have learnt that, or I have found out that. Could you complete the sentence? Pause the video now, and then we will run through some answers together. Fantastic. So you might be able to tell me that you have found out that some examples of light sources are the sun and a light bulb. You might also be able to tell me that up to now I have learned that light travels in straight lines. You might also want to say that light travels from the light source to an object, and then once it's reflected in the direction of our eyes, that's when we can see it. You are also right if you said that you know that when reflected, light bounces off an object in a different direction to the one that it hit it at. And another great answer would be that smooth, shiny surfaces reflect light really, really well. So well done if you got any of those things. So what we are looking at today is how shadows form. So looking at this picture, how do you think shadows are formed? And I'll give you a clue. You need to start over here with our light source. Well done. So light travels in a straight line to this figure over here, this person. What do you think happens next? Have a think and pause the video, see if you can figure it out. So once the lights hit this person, what do you think happens? That's right. Light hits the person, but it can't go through them. So it can only go around their body. And because it goes around it, there's a gap that's left and a shadow created that's the same sort of shape as the object that the light hit. So, 3 key words that we want to learn and use throughout today's lesson. We've got opaque, transparent, and translucent. What I'd like you to do is see if you can match up the definitions of this one, and this one, and these pictures to the right keyword. So pause the video, see if you can match up the definition, the image to the keyword. So let's start with opaque. Do we think that opaque is when all light from this torch passes through the object? Do we think that it's when that some of this light from the torch passes through the object, or when no light from the torch passes through the object? You are right if you said it's when no light passes through the object at all. So if this is the right image, we need to figure out if we've got the right definition. And at the moment it says all light rays are let through, which is not correct. So we need to find the one that says that no light is let through. This one's right. Now we need to see if we can find the difference between transparent and translucent. So transparent, do we think it's when some of these light rays pass through an object, or when all of them pass through? Give you the clue, it's an opposite to opaque. Have you got it? So it's when all light passes through an object. So let's switch these two around and then check our definitions. So when all light passes through the object, but down here we've still got some light passing through. So we need to switch these around as well. Well done if you got those correct. At the bottom of my page, I've got some examples of different types of materials. So some of these materials are opaque, some of them are transparent, and some of them are translucent. Pause the video now and see if you can figure out which ones fit in to the different types of materials. So let's start with a window. Do we think that windows don't let any light through at all, so they would be opaque? Or did you think that they might let all light through and they would be transparent? Or maybe you thought that they just let some through so that they're translucent. You are right if you said that they're transparent. So our year 6 windows in school let lots of sunlight through in the morning because we all get it on our tables when we're trying to do our literacy. They let all of the light through. What about foil? Where do we think that one goes? So something you wrap up your sandwiches with for school. Do you think it's opaque, transparent, or translucent? Well done, it's opaque. It doesn't let any light through at all. Let's have a go at a person's hand. Do you think that lets through any light or not? No, so that's opaque as well. And then we've got these ones left. So a sock. Where do we think that one fits? Do you think it'll let through much light? Lots of light or no light at all? None really, especially if it's a dark coloured sock. So we've got 4 left. Cling film, card, baking paper and tracing paper. So let's start with tracing paper. Where do we think that that one goes? Something we use in art, and we have to put it on the window so that sunlight comes through to let us draw our pictures. That's right, it's translucent. It lets sunlight through, but not lots of it. And if you're using it to draw, you can see the picture that you're trying to draw on tracing paper. What about cling film? So the clear thing that some of you might wrap up your sandwiches with. Does it let through all of the light or some of the light? All of it, well done. Baking paper, what do we think about that one? So this is something that you might use when you're baking a cake. You put it in your tin to stop it sticking to the tin. That one is translucent. That will also let through sunlight. It's a bit like tracing paper, but it's usually brown. And card, what do we think about that one? This one's quite a tricky one. I think I'd put it in opaque because card's quite a thick material. So it's not really going to let through much light and it's quite hard to trace on. So we are going to be doing an investigation in today's lesson. We want to find out how shadows form and how they change. So to do that, we need to make some predictions first. So there's 3 questions that I've put on here for you to answer whilst you're doing your experiment. So what happens when the light source is closer to the object? What happens when the light source is at a different angle? What happens when the material is opaque, translucent, or transparent? Does that shadow change? So that's what we're trying to find out today. We are going to do that by using different materials that we can find in our houses to make simple shadow puppets. And then we're going to use a light source to shine at those shadow puppets and write an explanation about what's happened to those shadows. So let's make some predictions together first. What happens to shadows when we change the distance the object is from the light source? So I've got 3 pictures at the bottom of my screen. You might be able to use those to help you answer this question. So this one, we've got the light source, which is a torch that's really close to this person. And look how big their shadow is. Huge. Then the torch is a lot further away from this person. And what happens to their shadow then? It gets a lot smaller, doesn't it? And then the last picture, the person's in the middle of where they were before. What happens to the shadow now? Okay, you might want to use a second picture to help you as well. So the light source is over here, this little yellow dot. It's very close to this object and the shadow is quite big. And then when it's further away from the object, the shadow is a little bit smaller, it's not as wide. So I predict that when the light source is closer to the object, the shadow will be bigger or smaller. Pause the video now, see if you can fill in the right answer. It's bigger, well done. See if this says the same, it does. If the source is moved closer, the shadow gets bigger. But we've got an extra bit here, and more faint or darker. So maybe we can use this 3rd image to help us. So when the light source is close to the object, Let's have a look at this shadow. Is it quite fuzzy or dark? Is it faint or dark? And then when the shadow is a lot further away, is our shadow now, sorry, when our light source is further away, is our shadow darker or faint? What do we think? So when the light source is closer, it will be more faint. It goes a little bit fuzzy around the edges. Well done if you got that one right. So one prediction. Our second one, what do you think will happen when you change the angle of the light? So I predict that when the angle of the light source changes, the shadow will either move or stay in the same position. So what you might want to think about is the sun. So when the sun is quite low in the morning, when it's starting to rise, our shadow might be here for this tree. But once it starts going past the lunchtime and it starts to become the afternoon, the sun's moved, our light source has moved. What happens to our shadow now? Is it in the same place or is it in a different place? That's right. It will move. Our shadow moves positions. Well done if you got that right. So, what do we think happens when the material is different? I'm going to leave that one for you to make your own predictions. So, I predict that the shadow will be darker when the material is opaque, translucent, or transparent. Maybe you want to say that I predict that it will be faint when the material is opaque, translucent, or transparent. You might want to write some predictions down before you start your experiment. So, today, you are going to make your own puppets out of materials that you've got at home. So here are some examples of things you might want to use. We've got foil, cling film, baking paper or tracing paper, normal paper, any other material you might be able to make one out of. So some of you might have craft boxes with felt in. Some of you might have some old socks that you don't really want anymore and you don't mind making a puppet out of. Card, you can use your own hands to make puppets. Sure, you've all made shapes using your hands before on the wall. Some of you can do birds and things. So using a torch or maybe a foam that's got a torch on it, you need to shine a light through your puppet and see how the shadow changes. You might want to change the distance and the angle of the light source to see what happens. So what I've got here is a piece of foil. All right, so I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with mine. And I'm going to use my scissors to make it a little bit smaller, make a little shape to see what happens to it if I shine the light source close to it. So I'm going to make a diamond shape with mine. So my light source has been turned on. I'm just going to prop it up at the side. And then if I get a piece of paper, so this is my piece of foil that I've chopped, it's really small at the moment, piece of paper to see what happens to this shadow. So when my piece of foil is close to my light source, it's over here, what happens to my shadow? What if I move my piece of foil further away from the light source? What happens to that shadow now? That might be something that you want to write down in your results. You might want to try a different sort of material. So you might want to try cling film, which is quite clear. Okay, so you need to figure out what sort of material this is as well. Is it opaque, translucent, or transparent? And you can always go back in the video to see if you can figure that out again if you've forgotten. So if I put my cling film close to my light source, what does it look like on that piece of paper? This darkness of the shadow has changed. What happens if I move it further away from the light source? What happens to the shadow? Okay, so lots of questions that we can answer to see if our predictions are right when we're writing down the results of our experiment. So you're going to have a worksheet that looks like this. You've got your predictions to make first. So what happens when the light source is closer to the object? I predict that. And then tell me what you think will happen to your shadow. What happens when the light source is at a different angle? You might want to change where your light is. What happens when the material is opaque, translucent, or transparent? So when you're doing your experiment, what I'd like you to do is tell me what material you chose. So I've given you an example, foil. Do you think it's opaque, translucent, or transparent? So I think foil is opaque. Where did you put the light source? So was it close to the object? Was it far away from the object? Or maybe you put the torch in front of it like I just did. Maybe you put it to the side. Maybe you put it above the object. Okay, and then tell me what the shadow was like. So if you choose to do it close and to the side, the shadow might be dark because the material is opaque and it doesn't let any light through. It was big because the light was close to the puppet. Okay, you might want to do foil again and change where you put the light. So you might want to say, this time I put it above the foil, and then tell me what happens to your shadow. Okay, you can maybe draw what it looks like if you want to do it on paper. So once you've completed your experiment and written up your results in full sentences, you can turn it in and we will be quite excited to see what you found and whether your results match your predictions.